Before we begin, do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're sitting right now. I want to know who's listening. From Tallahassee to Tacoma, from a kitchen table in Ohio to a porch swing in Georgia. Now let me tell you about the Sunday brunch that almost cost my daughter everything she owned, and the 6 words she texted me under the table that changed the whole afternoon. She walked into my restaurant wearing a cream silk blouse and a smile she'd clearly practiced in the mirror. The mother of the man my daughter wanted to marry. Diane Whitfield, 62 years old, hair lacquered into a helmet of platinum waves, 3 rings on her right hand alone, each one large enough to anchor a small boat. She air-kissed my daughter on both cheeks like they were old friends, though they'd met exactly twice. She extended a hand to me with the wrist limp, palm down, the way certain women do when they expect a kiss instead of a shake. I shook it. Firm, American. She blinked once, recalibrated, and her smile widened. Mr. Calloway, what a delight. Emma has told me so much about you. She had not. My daughter Emma had told me almost nothing about Diane, which I now understood was a kind of warning in itself. Emma is 28, a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai down in Miami, the kind of girl who still calls me every Sunday night without being asked. She's smart, she's grounded, she lost her mother to ovarian cancer when she was 19, and the 2 of us have been a team ever since. Her fiancé Brandon was sitting across from Diane, fidgeting with his napkin, looking like a man who already regretted whatever was about to happen. I owned the place we were eating in, the Coastal Pearl, a steak and seafood house in Coral Gables I'd built from one rented storefront in 1991 into a small chain of 4 restaurants across South Florida. I'd offered to host the brunch because Emma asked me to, and because I wanted to size up the family my only child was about to marry into. I'd reserved the private dining room at the back, the one with the bay windows and the slow ceiling fans, and I'd told the kitchen to send out the good stuff. Stone crab claws, eggs Benedict with house-cured gravlax, a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for something worth celebrating. I was about to find out this wasn't it. Diane arranged herself at the table the way a cat settles into a sunny spot, slow, deliberate, claiming territory. Her husband, Brandon's stepfather, a man named Roger with a salesman's tan and watery eyes, took the seat beside her. Brandon sat across from his mother. Emma sat next to Brandon, and I took the head of the table. The waiter, Marcus, who'd worked for me 11 years, poured the champagne with a face that betrayed nothing. He's seen enough of these family meetings to know when something's off. He glanced at me as he stepped back. I gave him the smallest nod. Stay nearby. To the future, Diane said, lifting her flute. To family, to union. We clinked. I sipped. The champagne was excellent. Diane drank like she was thirsty, and Roger drank like he was nervous, and Brandon barely wet his lips. Emma smiled at me across the table, and there was something tight around her eyes I didn't like. For the first 20 minutes it was small talk. Diane told me about her family in Connecticut, the Whitfields, who apparently had been people of consequence since before the Revolution. She mentioned Greenwich. She mentioned Yale, although it took me a few minutes to realize she wasn't claiming she'd gone there, only that her late father had attended. She mentioned her cousin, who sat on a museum board in Manhattan. None of these names meant anything to me, and I think that bothered her more than she let on. I run restaurants. I've shaken hands with 2 presidents and 3 quarterbacks, and I've never once thought to bring it up at brunch. Then she set down her fork, dabbed her mouth with the linen napkin, and said the words, "I'll remember until they bury me." Now, Mr. Calloway, Henry. May I call you Henry? Henry, I think it's time we talked about the wedding. I figured we'd get there, I said. Emma mentioned the kids were thinking next spring. We were going to... Spring is fine, Diane said. But I do want to be very clear about expectations. The Whitfield family has certain traditions when it comes to weddings. My own wedding was at the Greenwich Country Club, 400 guests, a string quartet from the New York Phil. Brandon is my only son. I will not have him married in a backyard with paper lanterns. Do you understand me? I understood her fine. I just didn't see what it had to do with me. Of course, I said carefully, whatever Emma and Brandon want. Their wedding, their day. Diane laughed. A real laugh, like she found me genuinely amusing. Roger smiled into his champagne. Brandon went very still. Henry, that's sweet, but the children don't know what they want. The children need guidance. I've already drawn up a budget. Top-tier venue, the Vizcaya Gardens, naturally. 350 guests. A custom Vera Wang for Emma. A tasting menu by a James Beard chef I've been corresponding with. Fireworks over the bay. A chamber orchestra. Floral installations by a designer out of Palm Beach who did my niece's wedding last fall. Welcome bags at the Ritz for out-of-town guests. 2 nights of pre-events. The whole production. That sounds expensive, I said. It is expensive. The full budget is $1.5 million. And of course, per Whitfield tradition, the groom's family selects the venue and the vendors, but the bride's family covers 70% of the cost. So that would be, she pulled a small leather notebook from her purse, opened it like she was about to take a dinner order, $1,050,000. From you, Henry. We'd want the first installment within 30 days, naturally. Vendors require deposits. I set down my fork. I want you to understand the silence that followed. The ceiling fans turned. Outside the bay window, a gull cried. Marcus, my waiter, had been refilling water glasses 2 tables over, and he froze mid-pour. Emma's face had gone the color of skim milk. Brandon was looking at his mother like he'd never seen her before. I am 67 years old. I have been at tables where men tried to buy my restaurants out from under me. I've been at tables where my own brother tried to talk me into a real estate scheme that smelled wrong, and I walked away before I lost a dime. I've been at the table when the doctor told my wife the tumor was inoperable. I know how to keep my face still, so I kept it still. Diane, I said, I'm not familiar with that tradition. Where I come from and where most folks in this country come from, the bride's family handles what they choose to handle, the groom's family handles what they choose to handle, and the couple covers the rest if they want it bigger. 70% from the bride's father is not American tradition. That's not even Connecticut tradition. That's something you made up at this table. Diane's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. They flickered toward Roger, just for a second, and Roger gave the tiniest nod, like a coach to a player. I caught it. I filed it away. Henry, Diane said, her voice softer now, almost wounded. I understand if this feels like a lot. But Brandon is marrying up, please don't take offense. That's just a turn of phrase, and the Whitfield name carries certain expectations. There will be people at this wedding whose opinions matter. There will be press. My cousin in Greenwich already called the society editor at... There won't be press at my daughter's wedding, I said. Henry, not unless Emma wants press, which I doubt, because she's a nurse and she likes her privacy. Diane's nostrils flared. Roger leaned forward and put a hand on her arm, and I watched her swallow whatever she was about to say. That's when I felt it. A foot under the table. Emma's foot. Tap, tap, tap. Against my ankle, hard enough to mean something. Then her hand, sliding down by her thigh, came up over the edge of the table holding her phone. Screen tipped toward me. She'd typed a message in her notes app and held it where only I could see. 6 words. Dad, he's not the groom. She is. I read it twice. I made my face do nothing. Then I looked at Brandon, really looked at him, the way he was holding his napkin, the way his eyes kept darting toward his mother and away, the way he hadn't said a single word in defense of this insane budget, hadn't laughed, hadn't disagreed, hadn't even looked surprised. He looked like a hostage. Emma slipped the phone back into her lap. Her hand was shaking. I lifted my champagne. I took a slow sip. I set the glass down and I smiled at Diane Whitfield the way I smile at vendors who try to overcharge me on prawns. Diane, I said, Roger, let me think on it. Right now, let's enjoy this beautiful brunch my kitchen has prepared. We can talk numbers another day. 2 words, really. Let me think, let me look, let me find out exactly who you are. Diane took it as a yes. I watched the relief wash through her shoulders, watched Roger's hand slide off her arm, watched her reach for her champagne with a renewed appetite. She launched into a story about her late father's yacht. I nodded in the right places. I asked Roger what he did for a living consulting. Mostly, between ventures was his answer, which told me everything, and I watched Brandon push food around his plate. When the brunch ended an hour later, Diane hugged Emma like a daughter and told me she'd email the vendor list by Tuesday. Roger pumped my hand. Brandon held onto my hand a beat too long and said, very quietly, Mr. Calloway, thank you for hosting. His eyes were red. I walked them to the door. I waved as their rental Mercedes pulled out of the lot. Then I turned to Marcus and I said, get me Joe Russo on the phone. Tell him it's Henry, and tell him it's important. Joe Russo is a private investigator in Coconut Grove. He's a retired Miami-Dade detective with 30 years on the homicide squad. He helped me out 15 years ago when a former employee tried to embezzle from the Coastal Pearl, and we've been friends ever since. He doesn't take just anybody as a client. He took my call. "Henry," he said, "what kind of trouble?" "The kind that just tried to bill me $1 million over Eggs Benedict." I'm intrigued. "Names?" "Diane Whitfield, mid-60s. Claims Greenwich, Connecticut originally. Husband Roger Whitfield says he's a consultant. Looks like a guy who's been told no a lot recently. And the son, Brandon Whitfield, 29, engaged to my daughter. I want to know who they really are. I want it inside a week." "Done. Anything else?" "Yeah," I said. "Look at the son separately. I think he's the only honest one in the bunch." I drove Emma home that afternoon. Brandon had ridden with his parents. As soon as the car door closed, Emma broke. The whole story came out in a rush. She'd met Brandon 10 months ago at a hospital fundraiser. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled a lot, sweet, funny, attentive. She'd fallen hard. She'd met Diane and Roger only twice, once for coffee in Miami, once for dinner at their rented condo on Brickell. Both times, Diane had dominated the conversation, Roger had laughed at her jokes, and Brandon had barely spoken. 3 weeks ago, Brandon had sat Emma down on the couch and told her he needed to tell her something. He told her his mother and stepfather had a problem. They'd been running a kind of scheme for years, moving from city to city, befriending wealthy families through their children's romances, then squeezing the families for money wedding deposits, investment opportunities, loans for sick relatives that didn't exist. They'd done it in Charlotte. They'd done it in Atlanta. They'd done it in Naples. They'd burned through whatever inheritance Diane had actually had, and now they lived on what they could extract. Brandon, he said, had figured it out 3 years ago when his mother tried to set him up with the daughter of a hedge fund manager in Boca. He'd refused to play along. They'd lived apart for 2 years. Then 6 months ago, Roger had shown up at Brandon's apartment in tears, said his mother was sick, said they were broke, said please, just one more time, just play along through the engagement so they could land softly. Brandon, who is a kind person and a foolish person, had agreed. He thought he could fake it for a few months, then cut his parents loose after the wedding. But then he met Emma, and he fell in love. And he realized he was about to let his mother bleed the family of the woman he loved for over $1 million. He'd been trying to find the right moment to confess to Emma. He hadn't found it yet when Diane sprung the budget at brunch. He'd been frozen. Emma, sitting next to him, had felt him shaking under the table. "I should have warned you, Dad," Emma said. She was crying. "I'm so stupid. I should have." "You didn't know the whole story," I said. "You know it now. We handle it now. Together." That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of bourbon, and I thought about my late wife. Linda had a saying, "People show you who they are at the table. Watch the table." I watched the table that day, and I'd seen it clear as crystal. Joe Russo called me back in 5 days. He came over to the house with a folder. "Henry," he said, "buckle in. Diane Whitfield was not Diane Whitfield. Her birth name was Diane Marie Lorello, and she was born in Hartford, not Greenwich, the daughter of an auto parts salesman, not a yachtsman. She'd attended a community college for 1 year. She'd worked as a hostess at a country club in her 20s where she'd met and married her first husband, a real estate developer who'd left her after she ran up 6 figures of debt on his accounts. Brandon was his son. After the divorce, Diane had reinvented herself. She'd married a second man, an orthodontist in Hartford, and bled him dry over 4 years. He died of a heart attack at 51, exhausted and broke. There were rumors at the time, but no charges. Then she'd met Roger. Roger Donnelly, not Roger Whitfield. She'd taken her first husband's name and slapped it on the second marriage like a fresh coat of paint. Roger had 2 prior arrests for wire fraud, 1 conviction, 18 months in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. He'd come out in 2009, met Diane in 2011, and they'd been a team ever since. Joe had documentation of 3 other families they'd targeted in the past decade. A widow in Charlotte who'd given them $80,000 for a cancer treatment Diane never had. A retired judge in Atlanta who'd loaned them $200,000 for a fake real estate venture. A restaurateur in Naples that one had hit close to home who'd given them $110,000 to invest in a vineyard that didn't exist. None of these victims had pressed charges. Diane and Roger had a gift for picking marks who were too embarrassed to go to the police. "There's more," Joe said. He pulled out a second folder. Brandon Whitfield. Real name Brandon Lorello, took his stepfather's name when he was 12. He's clean, no record. Pharma sales rep, just like he says, works for a real company, decent reviews. The kid is who he says he is. Is he involved in his mother's scams? Not as far as I can tell. Looks to me like he's a victim. Mother's been emotionally manipulating him since he was a child. He cut contact for 2 years between 2022 and late 2024. Then he started taking her calls again. I think your daughter's right about him. He's drowning. I closed the folder. I poured Joe a bourbon, and we sat on my porch and watched the sun go down over the canal. What do you want to do, Henry? Joe asked. I want to do this right, I said. I want them in cuffs, not just embarrassed. And I want my daughter and that boy to get out of this clean. Then we're going to need the FBI, Joe said. Wire fraud across state lines, that's federal. I have a friend at the Miami field office. Special agent named Watanabe. Good woman, patient. She'll want documentation, recordings, the works. You up for that? I'm up for it. The next morning I called Brandon. I asked him to come to my restaurant alone. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept. I sat him down in my office, closed the door, poured him a coffee, and I told him what I knew. All of it. I watched his face crumble. He cried. A grown man, in my office, crying like a kid. He apologized so many times I lost count. He said he'd been trying to figure out how to leave, how to get clear of his mother without abandoning her completely, how to protect Emma from what was coming. He said he'd marry Emma in a courthouse, in jeans, with no guests, if it meant keeping her safe. Brandon, I said, stop apologizing and start helping. Are you willing to wear a wire? He looked up. He wiped his face. He nodded. Then here's what we're going to do. Over the next 3 weeks, with Special Agent Hannah Watanabe coordinating from Miami and Joe Russo in the wings, we built it. Brandon called his mother and told her I was on board, but I had questions about where the money would go. Diane, smelling a payday, came running. She agreed to a follow-up dinner at the Coastal Pearl to walk Henry through the budget. She brought a fake invoice from a fake floral designer, demanding a fake $50,000 deposit. Roger backed her up with a smooth pitch about wiring funds to an escrow account that turned out to be a shell company in Roger's name registered in Delaware. Brandon wore the wire. Diane talked, Roger talked. They handed me documents with their own fingerprints on them. They told me about a pre-event venue deposit that needed to be wired by the end of the month. They told me about a wedding insurance policy payable to a beneficiary, Diane's beneficiary. They told me about a guest transportation fund in cash. They told me everything, because they thought they'd won. When we'd built the case Agent Watanabe needed, she moved fast. They were arrested on a Thursday morning at the Brickell condo. Diane in a robe and curlers, Roger in golf pants. Federal agents, a clean arrest, no drama. Brandon was at my house when it happened, sitting at my kitchen table with Emma, holding her hand. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. He started crying again, but this time it was a different kind of crying. It's done, he said. Mom's done. The trial took 11 months. I sat in the gallery for every day of it. So did Emma. So did Brandon, who testified for the prosecution against his own mother and stepfather. The widow from Charlotte showed up. The judge from Atlanta showed up. The restaurateur from Naples, a man named Vincent, 68, who I'd never met before and who shook my hand outside the courthouse and said, "Thank you. I never had the guts." He showed up too. Diane Whitfield, born Diane Marie Lorello, was convicted on 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of conspiracy, and 1 count of identity theft. She was sentenced to 14 years in a federal women's facility in Tallahassee. Roger Donnelly got 11 years, his second federal stretch. The judge ordered restitution of $1.3 million to the prior victims. Money I doubt anyone will ever see, but the principle mattered. In her allocution, Diane did not apologize. She blamed her childhood. She blamed her first husband. She blamed Roger. She blamed Brandon for betraying her. She did not mention Emma once. The judge listened with the patience of a man who'd heard it all before, and then he gave her the maximum the guidelines allowed. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, a reporter asked me for a comment. I said only this: when somebody shows you who they are at the table, believe them the first time. My late wife taught me that. Emma and Brandon got married 8 months after the verdict. The ceremony was in my backyard, under the live oaks, with 63 guests, paper lanterns strung between the branches, and a barbecue from the smoker I'd built myself. Emma wore a dress that cost $420 off the rack. Brandon wore his father's old suit, the real father, who died of cancer when Brandon was 9. We grilled snapper and short ribs. Marcus, my old waiter, brought his guitar and played until midnight. Brandon's biological father's sister came down from North Carolina to sit with him at the rehearsal dinner. She told him stories about the dad he'd barely known, and Brandon listened like a man finally getting back something that had been stolen from him. He calls me Pop now, not because I asked him to, because he wanted to. I think about that brunch sometimes. The cream silk blouse, the practiced smile, the leather notebook coming out of the purse like a dinner check. I think about how close my daughter came to spending the next decade being slowly emptied out by a woman who saw her as a wallet with legs. I think about Brandon sitting at that table, drowning in a lie his own mother had built around him since he was a child, and I think about how close he came to going under. And then I think about Emma's 6 words, glowing on a phone screen tipped just my way. People underestimate 60-something fathers. They think we're tired. They think we've gone soft. They think we'll write the check to keep the peace, to keep the wedding on track, to keep our daughter from crying. They think the silver in our hair means we've forgotten how to fight. That's their mistake. If you've made it this far, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you've ever sat at a table with somebody who showed you who they really were and you listened, drop your story in the comments. I read every one. We learn from each other here. Until next Sunday, friends, watch the table, believe what you see, and take care of your own.